Hi, Professor Gardiner here. I was asked to create a short primer on policing to help students better understand some of the issues, the pertinent research, and the potential next steps.
This is part 2 of the lecture.
Central to the current protest is the question of police use of force, and in particular, deadly force. Let's tackle the deadly force question first. At present, we simply do not know how often or to what extent the police in the United States use force upon its citizens in any given year. We are getting closer to knowing how often the police use lethal force. Except for a few agencies and states which were tracking their own use of force incidents, no one was really tracking use of force nationally till about 2015 or 2016. It wasn't until the focus on police shootings in 2014, 2015 that the public started doing what the federal government should have been doing for years. The Washington Post created a database of fatal police shootings in 2016 by searching local news reports across the country, as well as law enforcement websites and social media and other independent databases. In addition to the Washington Post, mappingpoliceviolence.org is another comprehensive database used by academics. These tell us that between 1,000 and 1,100 people lose their lives to police killings every year. These civilian efforts have actually pushed law enforcement to finally establish their own national database to track use of force incidents. Just like crime data and information on officers shot and killed, use of force data will be collected by the FBI from local agencies. Although this is a voluntary reporting system, the hope is that most agencies will contribute to it, just like they do the Uniform Crime Report and NIBRS. This national database began collecting data in January 2019, but it'll be at least another year before we have any solid data from it. In August 2019, California passed AB 392, and it became the first state in the nation to restrict officer use of lethal force to only when necessary instead of when reasonable. Now, use of lethal force by police must be reasonable to meet the U.S. Supreme Court standard, and it must be necessary to meet state law. When deciding whether lethal force was necessary, reviewers will now look at all of the actions leading up to the use of force, including the officer's actions. This is new for California, and in fact, other states and the federal government are now looking at California's law and considering implementing it or similar legislation in the wake of George Floyd's death. That brings us to the question, how often do police in America use excessive force? The answer is we have absolutely no idea. Why? Because there's no objective, measurable definition of excessive force. The 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act does require the collection of excessive use of force data, but honestly, no attorney general has actually required compliance with the law, nor created the infrastructure to actually accomplish it. So the new National Use of Force data collection will finally provide information on use of force incidents by police and characteristics of these fatal encounters, but it will not judge whether a use of force incident was excessive. So having said that, all agencies investigate use of force incidents within their own department. And if an officer's use of force is deemed to be outside policy, that officer will receive some sort of consequence, at least theoretically. This should be recorded in a department use of force report, which may or may not be available to the public. The most transparent departments put this information on their website, though it isn't always easy to find. As far as general use of force goes, the Police Public Contact Survey, which is an extension of the National Crime Victimization Survey, gives us some information about this. It tells us that use of force is rare. In fact, approximately 1 in 5, or about 20% of survey respondents, had contact with the police. Of those, only 1.6% reported that officers used or threatened to use force during the encounter. About 3/4 of those who did experience the threat or use of force, so about 530,000 people, reported that they thought it was excessive. And 87% of those folks believed that the police acted improperly. The most common use of force is actually physical force. It's not lethal force, and it's not conducted energy devices, and it's not chemical weapons. It's straight physical force, meaning the officer pushed, shoved, or grabbed the suspect. It is uncommon for a suspect to be injured as a result of the use of force. Males, blacks, and youths are more likely to experience the use of force, as are individuals who are under the influence, those who resist arrest, and those experiencing a severe mental illness episode. So it is important to note that physical force can vary quite dramatically in its effect, right? Getting pushed to the ground or shoved, that's very minor in comparison to what George Floyd went through, what Eric Garner went through, which are both also physical force instances of use of force. So while the police public contact survey indicates that 98.4% of all encounters do not involve any force or even the threat of force, scholars believe that this actually underestimates police use of force because it excludes recently incarcerated individuals from the survey who could have been in jail during the survey period, and arrestees are thought to be at a higher risk for having force used upon them. A recent survey of inmates confirmed that this was the case, and they found that the inmate sample was more likely to experience force at a higher level than the general population, and they were more likely to report injury from force. Importantly, though, we do not know if or how suspect behavior such as resisting arrest or being under the influence played a role into the higher rates of use of force against this population. But of course, this is the exact issue that people are protesting in the street. So we don't want to make any conclusions one way or the other. And we don't want to insinuate that the suspect's actions dictated an excessive response from police. Suspects' actions should dictate an appropriate and measured response from police, not an excessive response. And the response should be commensurate with the crime that was committed or suspected to have been committed. Accountability to the public is a key component of democratic policing. Being accountable requires a few different things. First, there must be a formal mechanism for the police department to receive feedback directly from the public. And it's important that it be tracked through ultimate resolution. So what happened? The chief executive of a law enforcement agency typically reports to an elected official, such as a mayor in the case of a city police chief, or an elected body such as a city council or a county board of supervisors, and may themselves be an elected official, common among county sheriffs. In this sense, they are in theory, if not practice, politically responsive to the electorate. Second, when appraised of a problem, the police must clearly acknowledge the behaviors that are being viewed as a violation of public trust. The police do not necessarily need to agree that the behaviors violate trust at this point, but they need to at least acknowledge that the public has alleged something to have happened that shouldn't have happened. It may be a perceptual issue, but the use of force or a misunderstanding concerning police procedure or whatever the case may be, it doesn't actually really matter. What's required is some formal acknowledgement by the agency that the public has identified a particular behavior as problematic. Third, the police must then investigate, explain, and correct, if necessary, the identified problem in a timely fashion. These three components are necessary requirements to conclude that an accountability structure exists in a police agency and for the police to be accountable to the public for the behavior of their officers. Extending this a bit, accountability structures can be internal to an organization as well as external to an organization. So internal accountability structures are commonly found in the form of a citizen complaint process, an internal affairs function, something similar, and a disciplinary process. With regard to external accountability structures, we're primarily referring to citizen oversight of the police. However, we're not going to get into those specifics here. So before we talk about the problems with accountability, it's important for us to take a step back to get a picture of what we expect of police and what draws individuals to want to work as police officers. August Vollmer, as you can see, is the chief of Berkeley Police Department in the early 1900s. He was a major proponent of professionalizing policing at a time when most police were corrupt and incompetent. He wanted to elevate the job to a profession. Here, he is laying out the ideal traits of a police officer. He chose his allusions carefully, and these historical characters would have been widely known and recognized at the time of his writing. He says, law enforcement officers should have the wisdom of Solomon, the courage of David, the patience of Job, and the leadership of Moses, the kindness of the Good Samaritan, and the diplomacy of Lincoln, the tolerance of the carpenter of Nazareth, and finally, an intimate knowledge of every branch of the natural, biological, and social sciences. This is quite a list. Vollmer is clearly painting a picture of a saintly and knowledgeable police officer. This was his hope and expectation, and to be honest, this continues to be our expectation today. A little bit unrealistic in some senses. So if you ask somebody why they want to be a police officer, most aspiring officers will tell you they want to help people and they want to serve their community. They want to give back. Of course, some, probably most, are also drawn to the high adrenaline version of policing sold by Hollywood, as well as department recruiting videos. Given the unique and complex nature of the job, along with the important powers officers are given, it's vitally important that we recruit the right individuals to be police officers and that we weed out those not morally up to the job. For this reason, police officers undergo a more thorough vetting process than almost any other job that exists, which makes sense given their powers and symbolism. Requirements, testing, and screening processes vary by agency, and all states have standards that agencies must use as a minimum threshold. Most agencies, however, have a very thorough and extensive vetting process, especially those in California. We have some of the highest training standards in the country. Yet there are more than 18,000 police agencies across the country, all of which have unique hiring situations and needs. For example, small departments often do not have the budget to hire college graduates or other well-qualified applicants. These poorly resourced agencies risk hiring individuals who are not qualified to be trusted with coercive powers and deadly weapons. They also often don't have training budgets as well. This chart gives you some perspective. It shows the percentage of college-educated officers by census region. On average, 30% of officers across the country have a bachelor's degree or higher. Agencies in the Northeast and Pacific regions have the highest proportions of college-educated officers, while agencies in the South have the lowest proportion. California is included in the Pacific region. As you can see, Orange County, represented by the orange bar, and Los Angeles County are quite a bit above average. This is good news for Southern California because although the value of a bachelor's degree for police officers is not indisputable, more research indicates positive effects than research indicates no correlation or negative consequences. So even though college-educated officers typically receive higher salaries, research suggests that officers with a bachelor's degree or higher save departments money. This is because research has found that college-educated officers have fewer individual liability cases filed against them. In other words, they don't get sued for misconduct. They also are generally thought to be better report writers, more innovative, and more likely to take on leadership roles within the department than officers without a college degree. If degree-holding officers are truly better report writers, that could translate into better investigations, higher court case filings, fewer evidentiary constitutional challenges, fewer false confessions or wrongful convictions, and/or more successful prosecutions. It's also been found that college-educated officers are less resistant to change and more likely to embrace new methods of policing. They also tend to have fewer citizen complaints filed against them, fewer disciplinary actions taken against them than officers without a degree. These last benefits may be particularly valuable for agencies which serve majority-minority communities where police public relations are often strained.